Welcome. Good morning. Thank you, everyone, for bearing with a little bit of technical difficulties. I feel like we all have meetings that start that way now, where it's a little bit of like, how does the world work? If it weren't that, then I'd be running late and like sending text messages to people like, I'm almost there. Just a few housekeeping notes before we begin. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Molly Uline Olmstead, and I'm the Executive Director of Art Possible Ohio, formerly VSA Ohio. We are offering these digital professional developments here at the end of the year. We had some in-person professional development scheduled, but due to COVID-19, we decided to move them online, and Joanie was gracious and generous enough to sign on and be our presenter. She has a second offering in this series tomorrow, so please be sure you register for that one. It will be the same time, 10 to 11:30. And then the following week, she has two separate offerings, again on Thursday morning and Friday morning. And you can find those on our Eventbrite page where you found this one. I recommend attending them. You can also get contact hours for them if that's something that you need in order to maintain your educator's license, or if you need to present it to whoever your supervisor is to show that, yes, I have been doing professional development. A few notes: I'm going to keep everybody muted while Joanie is presenting. If you have questions, we have a chat box. It's at the bottom of your screen. There's selections that you can go through security participants chat. Please just type your question into the chat box. At the end of her presentation, actually we can do we'll do a midway break and ask any questions, and then at the end we'll ask questions. If you do not want to read your own question, please make a note of that in the chat box. Otherwise, I will basically call on you, unmute you, and you can ask your own question at that time. So with that, I don't think we have any other housekeeping things to address.
But I have just one, because we are online and I can't see anybody because now I'm on a phone. Is there a way for people, I did want to just check who's here in terms of what kind of teaching they do, what age group. Is there a way for people to raise hands? I'm not sure I'm going to be able to see it, but if...
Yeah, here's what we'll do. So okay. Joanie, take a few minutes and introduce yourself. And yep. While Joanie is introducing herself, please type into the chat box what age level you teach, what type of art form you teach or subject area that you teach, and maybe just a word or two about why you signed up for this particular program.
Perfect, okay?
Molly,
you read my mind.
You go ahead. I'm going to switch myself
okay.
over to chat box mode,
okay.
and everyone just start furiously typing all at once.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for your patience with starting 5 minutes late. I guess that in the scheme of things, that's not really that bad. So my name is Joanie Kalem. I have been a music teacher since 1983. So I've stopped trying to do the math. It's easier to remember what year I started, because as the years went on, it got bigger and bigger, that number. And I had the amazing opportunity to have as my first two students, two children who learned in entirely different ways. One of them learned exactly the way I had learned as a child. She could read notes, she was mathematical, and she could understand the math end of music reading and apply it very consistently. The other one could not read notes, just couldn't. Something else was happening. But she was the most musical little girl that I had ever met. She could sing back to me anything I played. She could find it on the piano and play back to me anything I played. And 10 years after I taught her, she was 7 when we started learning together. 10 years later, when she was 17, she discovered that she had terrible dyslexia. And that explained, of course, 10 years later, why she could not read notes. But I always feel like, oh my goodness, this was the biggest gift I was ever given as an educator, to receive these 2 children into my hands who couldn't have been different in terms of their learning. And that set me off right away in search of how to teach different kinds of learners. Because up until that point, I had been blithely moving along as an educator, thinking everybody learned the way I did. The second gift I was given was as the local piano teacher in my little village. I lived in Israel at the time. As my local piano teacher, I got the reputation as the teacher who could teach anyone however they learned. And so I got a crash course that was never part of my music pedagogy teaching in all kinds of different learners, and ADD and ADHD, and how do you teach music and piano to someone who has a hard time sitting? Well, it's very easy. You get them up and you have them dance, and then you have them play the piano while they're dancing, and there's all these other things that I had to be very creative with. The next gift I was given, I started my teaching, probably like many of you, way before I became a parent. And my first child is now 27 years old. She could be a carbon copy of me in terms of how she learns and how she thinks and how she moves through the world. And I have a 25-year-old son who, of course, came along 2 years and 2 months later. And he is entirely the opposite of me in every way. And he has autism. And so in addition to just being a different personality, he's also dealing with a brain with autism, dealing with sensory processing disorder, dealing with learning disabilities, dealing with executive function issues, and dealing with the biggest heart in the world. And this is a person who is passionate about equity and passionate about justice. And he has been the best teacher that I could ever have received to become a better teacher. So that is my introduction. And now, I mean, Molly, have you been able, I've purposely not been looking at the chat.
I do. I got all kinds of great info. So we have Keisha, who's a school social worker, grades pre-K to 6. She says that the link was shared and she's always looking for ways to engage, empower, and inspire her clients and families. Brett, who teaches K to 8 art and Spanish, work with preschool and elementary age children. This is Sarah Flannery. She's with Ballet Met's education and outreach program, which is excellent. Eileen Jones, not a teacher, but will be providing transition activities for 14-plus-year-olds,
Cool.
which is such important work, doing that transition work. She thinks this training will help her build a better rapport and communicate with students. Julia Wing, dance and schools teacher with Ballet Met, works with pre-K. Nicolette Swift, hi Nicolette. Filmmaker and artist in the classroom. She's also worked with some of our schools like Bridgeway Academy. Kiana Simpson, who's a dance teacher with Ballet Met, works with elementary school students. Nancy Kangas, who writes poems with children of all ages, has a special interest in working with pre-K. Terry Boyarski, who
I know Terry.
Yeah, she's waving. I don't know if you can see her.
I can't.
Hi, Joanie.
Hi, Terry.
She's a pianist and ethnomusicologist, teaches all ages. We've got Jennifer Fuller, 15 years as grade 3 to 12 instructor for students with disabilities, instructor at summer art camps, currently a substitute right now, looking for ways to connect art with the other content courses she teaches. So a really nice range of participants teaching a wide range of ages and skills. And so, yeah, a really good group, and some wonderful familiar faces and names. So thank you, everyone. Joanie, would you like me to switch over to your PowerPoint now?
Not yet.
Okay.
If we were all together, we would be starting with a song. So we're going to start with a song. Now, I know that you guys are all muted, and I don't know how many of you have already experienced Zoom music. The time of COVID-19 has made us discover all kinds of things. Zoom was not created for people singing together on music. And unfortunately on my phone, I've got this great setup on my computer where I can plug into an external mic and put on this special Zoom sound, and I can't do that on my phone. So I am praying that this comes through sounding like music. How's it sounding so far, Molly? Is it kind of weird? I can't hear you. Can you unmute?
I said it's a little weird, but it's okay.
Okay, all righty. So it's supposed to be an echo song. So you guys at home can echo along. I can't hear you, but you can hear you. And this is about teaching and parenting and life. It's called Blues Light. So get ready to be my echo. Today was a good day. Today was a good day. I was feeling fine, feeling fine. Today was a good day. Today was a good day, and the sun did shine. The sun did shine. Well, yesterday was stormy. There were gray clouds everywhere. Sure was hard to get moving with the thunder pinning me to my chair. But today was a good day. Was feeling fine.
Feeling fine.
Today was a good day.
Today was a good
And the sun did shine.
The sun did shine.
You never know what tomorrow will bring. Trouble seems to run in packs. Worries, crises, miseries, knocking us on our back. But today was a good day.
Today was a good day.
I was feeling fine.
I was feeling fine.
Today was a good day.
Today was a good day.
And the sun did shine.
Sun did shine.
So hard to stay in the here and now. My mind makes me run around. Rat race, fast-paced craziness. I wanna slow things down. Just gotta take things one day at a time. No way to plan ahead. I thought I'd have a storybook life. I got a few surprises instead. But today was a good day. Today was a good day. I was feeling fine, feeling fine. Today was a good day. Today was a good day, and the sun did shine. Sun did shine. I'm not gonna fret about tomorrow. Somehow I'll get out of bed. Play some songs, pay some bills, get those hungry kids fed. 'Cause today was a good day.
Today was a good day.
I was feeling fine.
Feeling fine.
Today was a good day.
Today was a good day.
And the sun did shine.
Sun did shine.
Today was a good day. So, believe me, it works way better on the computer Zoom, but okay. So, thank you, Terry. So let's dive into the PowerPoint. And Molly, if you can just bring up that first slide, I actually have some questions about the very first slide.
Okay. There we go. And I am going to go ahead and throw this into presentation mode.
Yep.
Yeah, present.
Okay, so equity and inclusion in schools. We are all, I'm sure, very, very aware of everything that is happening in our world right now, starting with COVID and school shutdowns in early March. And I know that was the last time that I got to be at my at the school that I was teaching at with the grant from Art Possible, Ohio. And obviously we ran into the inequity right away in terms of if we were going to be trying to teach online, well, not all children had access to ways to learn online. Not all homes have Wi-Fi. Not all homes have internet. So right away, we ran into this issue of inequity, which of course totally affects inclusion. You can't include a child in an online class if there's no way for them to get on. Forget about how they can even access it in terms of their learning styles. That's a whole other story. So I don't know, how many of you were attempting to teach online and what issues you ran into. We'll take a break, as Molly had said, halfway through, and I would love to hear some of those things, or even, type them into the chat. What were some of the inequity issues that you ran into? So that's like before we even get to what happens in a classroom. That's to do with COVID. And now, of course, our country is finally dealing with the issue of racism and racial bias. And I, for one, am very, very hopeful that this is the time where we can actually address the inequities, the racism, the racial biases that affect our schools. And so I want you guys to keep thinking of all that stuff while we are going through this, okay? Because everything that I'm presenting is totally connected to our own preconceived notions that we may not even be aware we're walking around and thinking and putting onto the students in our classroom. But equity obviously has to do with socioeconomics. It obviously has to do with cultural background. It has to do with religious background, but it also has to do with neurological brain wiring. So Molly, can we move ahead? We're gonna skip slide 2 is about me. I will be sharing this PowerPoint with everyone. So Molly, let's move ahead to slide 4. Okay, so some of you may have seen this going around Facebook. On Facebook, it had just the first 4 definitions. Accessibility is being able to get in the building, and that is something that was addressed in this country in the 1960s and 70s with the ADA and ramps being put in and all kinds of other things, but it's still not universal. All right, so still someone with a physical disability may have trouble getting into certain buildings, and we know we've all addressed that. Diversity is getting invited to the table, right? Is the ability to be seen and be recognized as someone that should be sitting around the table. Inclusion is, well, you may be sitting around that table, but you're not actually given a chance to voice what you have to say at that table. Belonging is you have a chance to say what you have to say and someone is actually listening. And then I added this last one about equity, because to me, obviously, if the people who built the table and invited people to the table are not willing or able or aware of the need to understand and make accommodations for the fact that not everyone gets to that table in the same way, and once everyone is sitting around the table, not everyone can participate in the same way. And there's lots and lots of reasons why someone would not be able to participate in the same way as anyone else sitting around that table. We're all different, but there are certain unspoken rules at the table that often cause issues about equity. So Molly, can you advance to the next slide? So I don't know how many of you have seen this. This is something that I found from a website called nam.edu, as you see here, and it's the case for health literacy. So dealing with health, but to me, this is totally about education too. So we all see what's on the left there. The reality is there are some people entering our educational systems with a total leg up. Leg up is the understatement. And so then, of course, moving to the right, we've got equality. Oh, well, so everybody gets the same boost up. But that doesn't work, obviously. Equity is providing the boost up that people need, which is excellent, so that they can all access that baseball game. And then I liked this, that this liberation was, how about getting rid of the barrier? And of course, in order to get rid of the barrier, we need to recognize that there is a barrier. So let's go to slide 6. And I have often, I have to admit, it's so hard for me doing this and not seeing any of your faces. So I don't know if this is something that, you know, is making sense to you, if there's something that I need to explain better, if this is causing good thoughts, bad thoughts. So I'm just going to assume that everybody's with me. And if you're not, please write down a question on the side so that we can discuss it when we take a break, okay? So this is, keep going. Okay, thanks, Terry. So the invisible barriers to learning. We are all well aware, I believe, of the socioeconomic barriers. We are well aware of religious and cultural barriers when we can see them, okay? There are, of course, times when we don't know a child's background. They may have been born in this country, but come from a family of new immigrants. And so the child themselves may speak English as though they are an American, but we don't know necessarily what they're speaking at home, what their parents' level of involvement is, all those other things. So that's on the socioeconomic, religious, cultural area. I'm dealing here about the invisible barriers in terms of, as we said at the beginning, ACES and autism, sensory processing disorder, PTSD, and just touching on the issue of mental illness. So I like to say, instead of a PowerPoint with statistics and facts, we're going to be doing this through music and conversation, except that now we're online. So we do have a PowerPoint. We will still be doing some music, and we certainly will still be doing some conversation. But I want you to look at these invisible barriers to living. So I wish there was a way to see your hands. I don't know if you guys know where that hand button is, and I'm not sure I can even see it. But I'm guessing that many of you have, as educators, have already come across the concept of ACES, which is adverse childhood experiences. And there is more and more and more evidence coming out. And in the handout that I will email you later on tonight, there's an excellent link to a TED Talk that I don't remember her name right now, but a doctor out in California did this 15-minute TED Talk about ACEs and the latest statistics. So her latest statistics, this is kind of funny, 1 in 1.5 children have experienced at least one ACE. So 67%, and it's not just children, 67% of the population in America have experienced at least one ACE. I think it's probably closer to 100% because I don't think there's anyone who doesn't have at least one adverse childhood experience. Okay, but one adverse childhood experience is not going to cause a lot of issues, all right? It's when they start piling up that there is now an abundance of evidence that ACEs affect physical health. And that is why we are seeing this inequity in the number of COVID cases, that people who have had adverse childhood experiences that has led to poverty and mental health issues. It also leads to physical health issues. So ACEs is huge, and we will be diving into the details of that later on, but we're just continuing with these statistics. So 1 in 1.5 children have at least one ACE. 1 in 5 children, so 20%, are dealing with a brewing mental illness. And often the mental illnesses erupt a little bit later on in the teen years, so we don't necessarily see it in the early years, in preschool up through middle school. But I can tell you with my own son, looking back in retrospect, I know where that was brewing. I know where that hit. It was actually puberty for him. That's not a very large sample group for research, but looking back, I can see where it was starting to develop. 1 in 6 children in the US have what is called sensory processing disorder. And this has become kind of my go-to area of expertise because that was what I had to learn with my son. And as a result, I was able to change my way of teaching because I realized that it was far more common in my classrooms. 99.9% of children with autism have sensory processing disorder, but here the number is 1 in 6. So that is far broader than just children with autism have sensory processing disorder. And we're going to be diving into the details of that because that severely affects their ability to be in groups and in classrooms and to attend on Zoom teaching. So 1 in 25 children are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. And especially in Ohio, that is something we are seeing with the opioid crisis and all of what has happened to children's home lives with the opioid crisis, okay? And then lastly, we get to autism, which of course is my other area of quote unquote expertise. And in autism, I'm kind of laughing. It's not funny though. The CDC, 2 different offices in the CDC can't agree on the numbers of prevalence. So one office says it's 1 in 59 children, and they update it every 2 to 3 years. So the last number was 1 in 68 3 years ago, and now they're saying 1 in 59. But another office of the CDC, another department of the CDC, says that it is actually 1 in 36. So 1 in 59, 1 in 36, it's still a lot of kids, all right? And then all of these invisible learning barriers, they create challenges for children. They create challenges for classrooms. They create challenges for teachers. So I don't want to read through everything here. Molly, can we go on to the next slide? And this, oops, back one to slide 7. There we go. So again, I apologize if Zoom is not doing justice to the song. I can send you a link to where it is on YouTube. It sounds much prettier. This is a song that I actually put together through things that my son told us over the years. And of course, I realized that this applied to so many of my students. So, sometimes I just can't calm down. My skin is on fire, my brain's whirling round. Moving makes me better, but I know it bothers you. I need some help, I don't know what to do. I know it seems odd that I stare at the floor. When I look in your eyes, I can't hear anymore. In order to listen, I've got to look away. Not all the time, but it's really bad today. Well, you have no idea what it's like to be me. No idea how hard it can be. No idea how I long to be free. You have no idea what it's like to be me. I know you get embarrassed when we're out and about. The noise and crowds scare me, but I don't mean to shout. I know you spent a lot on my nice new shirt. I can't put it on, it makes my body hurt. Well, you have no idea what it's like to be me. No idea how hard it can be. No idea how I long to be free. You have no idea what it's like to be me. I know you worked real hard to make this good food. The smell hurts my head. I don't mean to be rude. I don't mean to misbehave. I don't mean to get mad. I'm so sorry. I don't want you to be sad. Teacher says I'm spoiled. Grandpa says I just need rules. Grandma says in her time I wouldn't dare do what I do. But they don't understand what it's like inside of me, 'cause bad behavior is all that they see. And they have no idea what it's like to be me. No idea how hard it can be. No idea how I long to be free. They have no idea what it's like to be me. And you have no idea what it's like to be me. No idea how hard it can be. No idea how I long to be free. You have no idea what it's like to be me. So I want to just run through what these different areas of sensory processing are, okay? And Molly, stay on this slide for one more minute. There are currently, when I started learning about this, my son's 25, I first came across this whole explanation for what I, as a mother, could tell was happening for him. He was 3 at the time, and the book angels dropped a book in my hand that was called The Out of Sync Child, and it's in the resources at the end of the handout. And it was very early research about sensory processing disorder. And at the time, she wrote about 6 different sensory processing disorders. So we all know about the 5 senses that we learn about in kindergarten and preschool, right? Okay, but there are now 8 total, so 3 sensory areas that we do not learn about in preschool and elementary school. And the first verse, sometimes I just can't calm down, my skin is on fire, and my brain's whirling around. Okay. How many of us have seen those kind of kids that just cannot stop moving? And they are usually labeled as ADD, ADHD, moving makes me better, but I know it bothers you. Okay. How many classrooms are kids told, sit still, don't move, stop moving, stop whirling around in circle time? Okay. Well, for many children, the only way they can actually listen is by moving. And this has to do with what is called the proprioceptive system and the vestibular system, okay? The skin on fire is children that are dealing with one of those systems we know, the tactile, okay? And their sensory processing of their tactile system is a little different, okay? Then we go on to, I know it seems odd that I stare at the floor. So one of the diagnostic tools for diagnosing autism is children who cannot meet someone's eye. But of course, it's not just about autism. It's also a very cultural thing. It has to do with our visual sensory overload. So there are people that feel uncomfortable looking somebody in the eye. And when you think about American culture, I have a feeling it's also British. I think it's like, you know, Western European culture. When someone is angry with a child, what do they say? Look me in the eye. I want to know that you're listening. All right. Now, ironically, for children with visual overload, if you make them look you in the eye, they have a harder time listening because they get lost in your eyes, especially if you're angry with them. Then they're lost and they're scared. Now, other cultures, Japanese culture, Chinese culture, children are taught never to look an elder in the eye. It is considered disrespectful. That is also part of some African cultures. It is also part of some Middle Eastern cultures. So in our multicultural classrooms, we may have a child who is being taught at home. It's not even about sensory processing. They're taught at home, you never look an adult in their eyes. And here we come as Westerners, and that is our standard. So there's lots of different things happening there. If we go to that third verse, I know you get embarrassed when we're out and about. The noise and crowds scare me, but I don't mean to shout. This has to do, again, with those three that we are less aware of, the proprioceptive system, which I'm going to explain in a minute, and the vestibular system. For people with sensory processing imbalance in those areas, they get overwhelmed, awesome, by the acoustics, okay? So the auditory system. Acoustics in malls are a killer for people with sensory imbalance in the acoustic system, all right? Crowds can be very overwhelming with someone with both a tactile and an acoustic sensitivity. Now, I know you spent a lot on my nice new shirt. Many of us come from cultures where it is very important to us that our children are dressed well, that they present themselves in an appropriate way when they go out in the world, okay? And it is a source of pride for us that they present themselves looking nicely according to our standards. Children with tactile sensitivity often cannot wear some of those clothes. They don't feel comfortable in button-down, stiff button-down shirts. They don't feel comfortable in what is considered church clothes, or, you know, I'm Jewish, in my case, synagogue clothes. Those clothes, my son once told me, it hurts, Mommy. I can't think if you make me wear these shoes. They hurt. Now, the tactile sensitivity, will obviously explore more about that. That is one that many of us can remember too. How many of us were the people that hated the tags in our shirts, and now clothing manufacturers mostly take those tags out, right? But it's physically painful to someone who it has a tactile sensitivity. Where'd my computer just shut down? Okay, and then if we go on to that next verse, I know you worked real hard to make this good food. obviously we've run into picky eaters, okay? But picky eaters has to do with both the gustatory sense, so kids who can't handle certain textures, but obviously we know food also has to do with the olfactory sense, children who don't like the smell of a certain food, and it physically makes them nauseous. So food is another big cultural issue. This, I think, is probably an issue across most cultures that I know, that you eat what is put in front of you. I am the child of Depression era parents. It was unfathomable to them that you would not eat what had been cooked. And my downfall was always the liver. Couldn't handle the liver. Those were the days I ran screaming from the table. Other than that, I ate what was put on my plate, but I couldn't handle liver. So that's another area that many of us are aware of. And of course, as adults, we don't have to eat something we don't like anymore. But kids are quite often in that situation. So it becomes a power struggle on top of everything else. And then, you know, the last part of that verse, I mean, my son has often, you know, meltdowns, he's 25, they still happen. Overload still happens. Shutdown still happens. And then he comes out and he says, I don't mean to be like this. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But these are things that are real. And so many of us never learned about sensory processing disorder. So our attitudes are often, is this kid just spoiled? Okay. And it's hard to know because it's possible. This kid that's flipping out because they don't want to do something is possibly just spoiled. My thing, my whole overall program is called But First Do No Harm. Because especially as a teaching artist, which I am often these days, I don't have a long time to get to know a kid. And so I'm coming in often with no information about the kids in front of me. And I've got to make a quick on the spot, is this kid just spoiled or is there something else going on that is an invisible disability? And I, at this point, am forcing myself, because spoiled makes me crazy. I admit it, okay? But I'm forcing myself to switch into maybe there's something else going on here, okay? ACES, PTSD, they also, though their cause is not neurological, like sensory processing disorder, they do cause sensory overload. And so the behavior that presents in a classroom is often the same. And in my case, the grandpa and grandma was very real with both my in-laws and my parents. You know, they're looking at my kid going, what's his issue? Just whip him into shape. And they didn't understand. That's okay. So let's move on now to slide 9. Oops, sorry, slide 8. So this gives, you know, just an overview of what sensory processing disorder is. It was formerly known as sensory integration dysfunction. Both terms are equally good because they both explain that it is, disorder is a little bit ugly of a word, of course. Some people like to call it sensory processing difference, and that is certainly a more palatable word because it is this phenomena of our particular wiring creates a situation where how we process the things that our senses are telling us is different than what the quote unquote neurotypical brain would be able to do, okay? And so our senses, you know, those of us who've never thought about this, we've never thought about how much work our different sensory areas are constantly doing. And for someone with sensory difference, that produces ADD, that produces ADHD, because if I am not able to filter out this breeze that is currently coming through my window, or the slight hum coming out of my light and my computer, the fan from my computer. If I'm a person who can't filter those things out, I would not be able to be talking to you now. So this last bullet point, when we cannot efficiently process input from one or several of these senses, our feeling of well-being is negatively affected and we get overwhelmed. So that is going to totally affect how we function in a classroom and in a learning scenario, okay? So let's go on to slide 9. This is just the overview of those areas of sensory processing. And I actually want us to jump to, hang on. I want us to jump to the ones that are lesser known, okay? And then we will come back to the ones we're more familiar with. So Molly, can you jump to slide 17? And I know that I'm going super fast, and I know this is a lot to process through your ears. And I know that for many of you, this is probably not the best way to be learning. So I want to acknowledge that and apologize. And if you're the kind of person that learns best while you're moving, it's Zoom, so you can close your camera. I can't see you anyway, so it doesn't matter. I hope that is big enough for you guys to see. But I want you to see, so the proprioceptive sensitivity. Is the art possible icon right in front of that second picture on the right? For people, it is on my screen, but I don't know if it is for other people. And I don't know if there's a way to change that. So if there isn't, Molly, don't worry about it. But what I have put here is these two pictures. It's good? Awesome,
well,
thank you.
Everybody, if you sort of hover over that, it'll bring up like a single line and then a fatter line, 2 stack line, and you can minimize so the little icons of everybody's cameras.
Okay, okay, awesome.
So that's something
thank
people,
you.
I think, can do on their own.
So what I want to explain here with the proprioceptive system. The proprioceptive system is located in our cerebellum, and that's the lowest part of our brain. And the cerebellum is, of course, attached directly to the brain stem, which is often called the reptilian brain. And the proprioceptive system, it controls our maintenance of balance and posture, our coordination of our voluntary movements, our motor learning, so eye-hand coordination, hand preference, hand writing, eye movement. Okay, so obviously we can't learn to read if our eyes can't track, and cognitive function, okay? Specifically language learning. So my son did not speak until he was 5. And at that point, he, there are many late speakers who, once they start to speak, they launch into full sentences. He did not. He launched into one-word sentences. So this part of his brain was severely impacted. And here's the really tricky thing about all of our sensory areas. You will see on the left-hand side of the screen, hyposensitivity. So people who are undersensitive. You will see on the the right-hand side of the screen, I'm also dyslexic where it comes to right and left. On the right-hand side of the screen, you will see the hypersensitive, people who are oversensitive, okay? So someone who is undersensitive, the hypo, in their proprioceptive system, I have this picture here of a kid crawling out of their crib. Okay, they will seem fearless in their high energy activities. They will jump, they will climb, they will do things that are making adults watching them have their heart stop. but they are actually perfectly safe. And this is what they are needing to keep their bodies calm. Okay, so think of these kids doing extreme sports. I have a close friend in Israel. Her son dropped out of school when he was 15 and was involved in mountain bikes, but extreme mountain bikes. And she was terrified. And he would always say to her, Mom, this is how I can stay calm. I can come home and do my online learning after I have been out riding hard. So this is something that is a natural desire to bring to balance. However, some of them, if you go down that list, okay, some of them will intentionally bump into things. They're the kids who are standing in the line and they're bumping into other people and you're like, why are you doing this, okay? And sometimes it's because it helps them stay grounded, or they'll bump into a wall. All right, but they also might be accident prone, and they might not know how to be gentle, so they use too much force when they're handling classroom materials. All righty, I'm not going to go into all the tries, but on every sheet, I'm hoping that you guys will have a chance to go through this tonight and look at all these different tries, and I'm fairly sure that many of you have also tried other things that I haven't added here. So I'm hoping that tomorrow we'll get a chance to share your tries, okay? But now look at the right-hand side, the hypersensitivity, the kids that are oversensitive. That picture shows a little child sitting on a playground, not wanting to move, okay? I hope that's what the picture communicates. That's what I wanted the picture to communicate. So not getting on those swing sets, not getting on a jungle gym, scared to move because they are overly sensitive in their proprioceptive system. And it makes them so nervous that they move very, very carefully. And they are very averse to crowds because they don't want to be touched. Okay, so think about one classroom with the kid who's undersensitive, who's always knocking into people, and the kid who's hypersensitive, who doesn't want to be touched, okay? And that is the reality of many, many, many of our classrooms, right? Okay, we're nipping through this. Let's go to screen 18. And screen 18 talks about the vestibular sensitivity. So vestibular system is located in our inner ear and has to do obviously with balance. There is much overlap between vestibular and proprioceptive, okay? Which is why the early information about sensory processing didn't differentiate between these two. But many of you have experienced sometime in your life an earache where you felt like you didn't have a sense of balance, because that is what gets effective with vestibular sensitivity. So again, on the left, we have the kids who are hyposensitive, they're undersensitive, so they're again always needing to rock or swing or spin or jump because it helps them feel grounded. This is another area that affects eye tracking. Okay, so eye tracking distinctly affects learning when it's reading learning. It can affect delay in language skills, delays in reading. Children that have a hard time crossing that midline, I don't know if you've run into that. I'm sure dancers have run into that, where there are kids that can't seem to do this. And they will often be sitting in a W position, which because they can't sit cross-legged, it hurts their legs to sit cross-legged. It also makes them nervous because that midline is hard, okay? And the W sitting, like, you know, when I first saw that, I was like, so what's the problem? You know, that's not a big deal. And it turns out that it does affect posture, it does affect brain processing. It's challenging, okay? Our right-hand side, that little girl sitting up at the top, again, crying because she doesn't want to move, okay? Very overly sensitive, don't like sports, get carsick very easily, get dizzy very easily, are very, very cautious with their movements as a result of that, because who wants to be feeling dizzy all the time? Who wants to be carsick all the time? All right. Let's go on to 19, and then screen 19. And then maybe, Molly, it's time to, I'm just looking at timing. I want to make sure that we get through some of the other things, but I also want to give some time for questions. So let me introduce interoceptive, and then we'll real quick go through the other areas of sensory processing, and then we'll take a quick break for questions, and then we'll come back for ACES and PTSD. Okay, so interoceptive. This is the newest discovery in terms of scientist research and sensory processing. And interoceptive is the area of sensitivity where our internal organs give us messages. So on the left-hand side, you have that picture of the kids that are always walking around in sports shorts, no matter how cold it is, and they won't put on jackets, and they seem not to experience the cold. I taught for a long time. I was the general music teacher for a long time at the Columbus Jewish Day School out in New Albany. And we had one year, we had, I think they were 5th graders that year, and it was a class entirely of boys. And so one of them definitely had a hyposensitivity to cold. And he also had tactile issues. So the only thing he was really comfortable in were long basketball shorts and a basketball t-shirt. And, but for him, it was because of his interoceptive sensitivity and his tactile sensitivity. But because it seemed cool, all the boys were insistent on dressing like that through the winter. But the other 10 boys in the class were actually really, really cold. And so, you know, the school had to come in and say, all right, no gym shorts except for this kid, you know, in January. But these are the kids that they might not sense hunger. They might not sense being full from food. They might not sense thirst. They might not sense fatigue. Obviously, that happens with a lot of children. They don't identify when they're tired. The tricky thing is they also might not sense when they need to go to the bathroom, okay? They might not sense when they're going to get sick. So all these different things if you are hyposensitive. And on the other side, the hypersensitivity is the child who's overly sensitive to those internal things. So they're always hungry, and they're always worried about being hungry. They might feel full from very, very little food, or they might not eat enough. Okay, so they're overly sensitive to what is being communicated from their internal systems. All right, let's go back real quick to slide 12. And I'll wait till you get there. Auditory sensitivity. This is often the first thing that we can observe as teachers, okay? On your left-hand side, you have the kid who is just dreaming, okay? Not paying attention to anything that the teacher is trying to communicate. And often these are children who they're undersensitive to sound, and they can't actually process a conversation that is not being had directly to them because they are hearing everything. Again, often a description of ADD. And then on the other hand, I as a musician see this all the time, the person on the right who is sitting there with their hands covering their ears because they are so sensitive to auditory input. And many classrooms are an auditory nightmare for these kids because The sound echoes around in ways to someone who is overly sensitive. Again, in ways that I don't hear. Or if I hear it, I have to really pay attention to it, and it doesn't bother me. But for some kids, especially a teacher speaking in a loud voice in a classroom where there is no carpeting, that's echoing. That is hard, okay? And we're gonna whip through these because, again, these are the areas of sensitivity. So let's go to slide 13. So tactile sensitivity, our sense of touch, our sense of feeling, what is on our skin. So on the left, you've got the little kid who's wearing their food. That was my son. And on the other hand, on the right, you have the child who doesn't want to be touched, who doesn't want to be hugged. And again, that is often a list on the diagnoses of autism. But it could go either way. It could be hyper, it could be hypo. And how does this affect kids in the classroom? All right, so kids who are hypersensitive tactilely, first of all, it's going to really affect what clothing they're willing to wear, okay? But they might not want to get their hands dirty. So it's going to affect like how they interact with art and art materials. And they may really not enjoy art because they know that it's going to affect their hands. On the other hand, you've got those kids who are hyposensitive, who are the ones that are always covering their hands in glue, and they like to feel it dry and then pull it off. And, you know, I don't know if these days art teachers get upset about that or not. In my day, my art teacher always thought that was funny when I did that, but I really enjoyed that. So the hypersensitive are the people that don't feel good in certain kinds of clothing. And the hyposensitive are the kids that couldn't care less, okay? Doesn't matter. Let's go on to 14. 14 is our sense of smell, olfactory. So on the left, that is a picture I copied from the internet. Some of you may have seen that child with their nose straight in the flower, which is very cute, but it's also representative of someone who actually can't smell anything. And we know that that is actually dangerous, okay? So there, you know, how does that affect in a community sense people who aren't aware of their own smell? On the other hand, you've got the overly sensitive on the right-hand side who are overwhelmed by smells to the point where it makes them nauseous, gives them headaches. So one way that really affects things in classrooms is these kids that come in on Monday morning after a class has been, school has been cleaned on the weekend. And either as a teacher, I've gotten used to the smell of the cleaning material, or it just doesn't bother me. But for them, it really does bother them, okay? Let's jump on to gustatory oral, which is slide 15. And on the one hand, you've got the kid on the left who chews on everything, the kids that are chewing on their clothes, that are chewing on their pencils, that are chewing on their hands, that are chewing on their fingers, okay? This is a sign of undersensitivity, and it helps them ground, okay? My daughter, who is not on the autism spectrum until she was 11 years old, came home every single day with the front of her shirt totally wet from chewing on it. It helped her concentrate. It helped her stay calm at school. She wasn't somebody with a lot of sensory issues. It didn't affect her learning. It certainly affected her clothing, all right? On the right-hand side, you have those kids that are overly sensitive. They're picky eaters. They have a very strong gag reflex. I didn't give a lot of details on this one because it's fairly obvious. This is something that many of us as adults have also experienced. Maybe we've grown out of it, maybe we haven't. So slide 16, and I apologize for how fast we're going. slide 16, visual sensitivity. Obviously, this also really, really affects children's experience in a classroom. It also affects children's online learning, okay? A child who is undersensitive is often these kids that, again, kind of a stereotypical autistic behavior, the kids that might sit and spin things. And I had one little preschooler who that was his thing. And his mom was having a very hard time with that, and she was trying to force him to stop. And I explained to her that that actually helped him listen. He participated in my music classes totally if I allowed him to spin something. And he was nonverbal, but he would sing along. If I asked him to stop that, he just became very agitated, and there was no way he could participate because he was upset. So it, again, is a grounding behavior, and it actually helps kids with this undersensitivity to be able to focus their eyes, okay? And so this has a lot of specific behaviors that are typical of kids that are on the autism spectrum. But the hypersensitivity on the right-hand side, again, this is kids who won't look you in the eye. And there's a great quote here from Temple Grandin, who is now an elderly woman with autism who has been very successful in her life professionally and has been very successful explaining autism to the rest of the world. But this really affects kids in classrooms, because someone who is oversensitive, you hand them a worksheet and they may not be able to find their way on that worksheet because it's just overwhelming. It's too much information, okay? They might be bothered by certain kinds of lights. Particularly, they can see and feel the flickering of fluorescent lights. And how many of our schools and public buildings are lit by fluorescent lights, okay? They might get confused in a busy room. So totally guilty of this. In the times when I was a classroom teacher, I would use those walls for information until I realized that for many children, it was overwhelming to come into my music room because there was too much on the walls. So, that's the 8 areas, whipping through those 8 areas, but you're going to receive this. So I really hope that you can, Molly, let's stop the PowerPoint for a minute. I want to see, let's take maybe just 5 minutes of questions, which I know is crazy short, but we will have more time tomorrow for questions. So, you know, if we don't get to your questions today, we will certainly get to them tomorrow. You can also email them to me. I do want to come back and real quick address ACES, okay? So maybe let's stop the PowerPoint. And does anybody have any questions that Molly can unmute you? I will be able to hear you. I'm not sure I'll be able to see you, but maybe.
At this time, it looks like no one has questions.
Okay, all righty.
So I think we're good to continue.
Okay,
again,
so then.
Yeah, again, if you do have a question, please just type it into the chat box, and we will follow up at the very end of this presentation. And like Joanie said, if you have questions between now and our session tomorrow, and you don't want to forget them, please send them via email to info@artpossibleohio.org.
Okay, so now I got to move because I realize I've been standing in one position for the last 40 minutes. Molly, let's skip to slide 21. And I'm going to leave off the really good song I was going to use to introduce ACES to you. But I'm looking at our time, and I will send you links to all these songs, and you can listen to them at your leisure. So we're going to slide 21. In case there's anyone There we go. Oh, no, the slide before that. So maybe it isn't 21 on yours. That's weird. It's 21 on mine. No, we got to go back. So one behind, one before that. Yes. Okay. So in case there's anyone who hasn't heard, the acronym ACES stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences that affect developing brains and affect how children respond to stress, which of course affects their school experiences, affects physical health. It has a direct effect on our immune system. It impacts long-term health. And in the 2019 CDC bulletin, it said that 61% of adults had experienced at least one type of ACE. And as I said at the beginning, that number is changing all the time. And nearly 1 in 6 reported that they had experienced 4 or more types of ACEs. So let's go to the next screen. And, you know, as we're going through this, think to yourself, again, you're going to get this handout and you can make notes for yourself, but think to yourself, how many of these things have you experienced? Okay, so what are ACEs? What is an adverse childhood experience? Personally experiencing physical violence or abuse, all right? And how many of our kids are growing up in homes where that's happening or in neighborhoods where that's happening? Think of what is happening in terms of racism right now, okay? Our kids, our students have often witnessed issues between neighborhoods and police, okay? Without getting into politics and details about that, we're teaching kids who have seen these things, okay? Personally experiencing verbal violence or abuse. How many of us grew up or grow up in those kinds of homes where one or more of our parents was verbally violent, verbally abusive? Bullying. How many of our kids are experiencing bullying? And this is, of course, an area that we as teachers have direct responsibility to be seeing what is going on in the classroom. How many kids are experiencing bullying outside the classroom? That's a whole other story. Okay, witnessing violence in the home or community goes back to neighborhoods and what kids are seeing, okay? Knowing someone in your community who has died as a result of violence. So these people who are dying, they are community members. So these kids know these people. Having a family member attempt or die by suicide. We all know that the mental health and suicide rates are sky high in this country. So there's no way these kids don't know someone. Witnessing substance abuse. Again, Ohio has been ravaged by the opioid crisis. Witnessing a family member struggle with mental health problems. Experiencing acrimonious parental separation or divorce. Or experiencing, watching an abusive relationship between your parents. Family members being in jail or prison, experiencing housing instability or homelessness, experiencing food insecurity, experiencing income insecurity. So I know myself how many of those I experienced as a child, excuse me, and I know for my students, some of these things. But the tricky part about ACEs, again, as visiting teachers, even sometimes as a permanent classroom teacher, we don't always know the details of what is going on in our children's home lives. And what we see is the behaviors. So ACEs often present with similar sensory overload behaviors, just like sensory processing differences. The cause is something different, but research is now showing that ACEs change the developing brain. And so they change the wiring of developing brains. And so they end up causing neurological differences the same way as someone who was born with a sensory processing wiring difference. Okay, let's go on to slide 23, the next slide. So in case your numbers are different, I don't know. Oh, no, sorry, slide before that. Clearly your numbers are different. I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm looking at a different one than what I sent you. So this, I think, is a great graphic of the connection between all these things and what happens to people with ACEs through their life. And, you know, look through this. Adverse childhood experiences connect to disrupted neurodevelopment, which means the wiring in the brain is going to change, which leads to social, emotional, and cognitive impairment. So it often looks a lot like autism, but it didn't start like autism. That goes to adoption of health risk behaviors, coping skills that aren't always healthy, that impacts your life potential, that causes disease, disability, and social problems, and that often leads to early death. So ACEs are directly involved in what is happening in our classrooms. So let's go to the next slide, because this starts to look at preventing ACEs. So some of these things are things that we as classroom teachers or visiting artists, we don't actually have the ability to impact. Strengthening the economic support to families, okay? As teachers, that's not our direct connection. But the next one, promote social norms that protect against violence and adversity. So this all comes back to creating a compassionate classroom, which we will be talking much more about tomorrow, okay? Ensure a strong start for children. That's us, all right? Now, some of the things listed here: early childhood to home visitation, high quality childcare, preschool enrichment with family engagement. So any of us working in the preschool area, that's directly us. But also what's not mentioned here is if we are aware of behavior. I always say these 3 words, this is what I want you to take out of this if you forget everything else that I've been talking about for the last 80 minutes. Behavior is communication. So what we see as behavior are clues to us of what the child is trying to communicate to us. And our job is to be detectives to figure out what is causing that behavior. So that is where we come in with the awareness that maybe this isn't just being spoiled. Maybe this isn't just being obstinate. It sure looks like obstinance, but why? Why would this kid be being obstinate now? What's happening at home? What's happening in their brain? So that is where we come in with that strong start for children. The next one, teaching skills. Hey, that's us, okay? Because social emotional learning, so often I know, when I was I was a classroom music teacher, but I still had this curriculum and these skills, music skills that I was supposed to be getting to. But for me, primary was also social emotional learning. It was always social emotional learning. And so music had to be taught as a tool for teaching social emotional learning. And music's real easy to do with that. I don't know about math. That's not my area. I would love to hear a math teacher be able to integrate math teaching and social emotional learning, but of course there's a way to do it, all right? So teaching skills is something that we have direct impact on. Connecting youth to caring adults and activities, also something that we can have a direct connection with. And intervening to lessen immediate and long-term harms, that's less our area as teachers. But if you look at these strategies, we have a list of 6 here, where 4 of them, 4 out of 6, are areas where we have direct contact and connection. So let's go on to, for me, it's slide 26, but it's the slide that's titled PTSD, Molly. Okay, so I'm fairly sure that most people have heard this acronym. Usually it is attributed to veterans coming back from wars, people who have been through violent events, people who have been through mass gun episodes here in this country are quite often affected with PTSD. But where it applies to us is ACEs in most cases. I wrote here often, but it is usually, ACEs usually lead to an experience of PTSD, where someone has experienced an ongoing experience that is so frightening that they will continue to have flashbacks, okay? That is going to severely affect their learning. Sensory processing disorder usually leads to PTSD as well, all right? So kids with PTSD, kids with ACEs, kids with sensory processing disorder, they often present in our classrooms with overload symptoms. That could be hypo or hyper. Hypo overload means shutting down. Hyper overload means lashing out, having a big, big tantrum, okay? Those 2 effects are a result of sensory overload, the cause of which could be these different things, all right? So let's go down to, we're skipping all the songs. Let's go down to, for me, it's slide 28. It says, what can we do? So a lot of it is things that I have already talked about, a lot of this page, but I want us to skip down to where it says inclusion requires, well, actually, let's go to the one before that. Educators have a direct impact regarding classroom culture. So teasing and bullying. Teasing and bullying are an adverse childhood experience. Ooh, I can attest to that. But there are definitely things that we can do when we have our eyes and ears open. You know, the whole story of teachers have eyes in their back of their heads. Well, let's use those eyes in the back of our heads. All righty. And so that is something that we can be very, very proactive in. And we're going to talk about this more tomorrow, about creating a compassionate classroom culture. And then the next bullet point, inclusion requires stretching. It is about ethnic, racial, socioeconomic, educational, and religious diversity, but it's also about the diversity of thinking and learning styles, and the diversity of social, emotional skills and emotional development, right? So we as educators get annoyed by certain things. We're human. And there are certain kinds of kids and certain kinds of behaviors that may really rub us the wrong way. They're annoying. And likewise, in the classroom, kids get annoyed with each other. And so there are certain kinds of behaviors that someone with sensory processing differences, PTSD, and ACEs may be exhibiting that are annoying to the other kids. So it's very much up to us to be modeling inclusion and compassion in those classrooms. And this last thing is something that we will address more tomorrow, where direct messages work the best. I find that, I don't know if it's a cultural thing in this country. I'm not sure. I haven't done the research of, has it always been this way? When did it start? But I find that teachers often don't address certain issues, wanting children to figure it out themselves because thinking that that is something that helps children grow. And sometimes that's obviously true. But sometimes that vacuum that the teacher leaves is where not healthy stuff festers. And so I am a total proponent of direct messaging, direct modeling, direct inclusion of the person who may be being ostracized. And we'll dive into that more tomorrow. So I know we whipped through a whole lot of material. The next page is the sources. Actually, the next page is a song, which we're going to skip because it is 11:30 and I want to honor your time. So Molly, can we stop this PowerPoint? And I hope that that was useful. I hope that that provided some information that is new to you and can be put in place in your teaching. Again, if you've got questions, if you can send them to Molly or to me, we will be sending out the handout. And I know that this was actually not modeling diverse learning styles because I was talking so fast and moving so quickly that I hope you'll have time to think this through later on and digest and think about it. And remember, behavior is communication. So if everything else was too much information, just remember that.
Thank you so much. That was, I know for me, I was, even though I have the PowerPoint, one of my learning styles is to take notes while I listen. And my hand is very tired from furiously writing notes with all of that good information. I'm going to not do a full wrap up because, like I said, this presentation continues tomorrow. So instead, I will thank all of you for joining us today. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. As you're sort of digesting and ruminating on all that was said and covered, please do jot down any questions, any thoughts you might have. I think we'll kick off tomorrow with a few minutes of just like, hey, how is it all settling in? What has occurred to you over, the last 24 hours? And then after that, we'll kick into, I got a thumbs up from Kiana. After that, we will launch into part 2. In the meantime, everybody have a wonderful day. It looks like it's not super hot out, which is great. And thank you so much.
It started to rain.
Yeah, that's okay though, because then I don't have to water later.
So Molly, Jennifer has a question about will there be a new link?
Yes, I am actually going to send that out a little bit later today. People can still register for tomorrow's workshop up until about, I think it's an hour before it actually starts. So you'll get a follow-up email this afternoon, and then I'll send out one final email tomorrow at that 1 hour, like once the sales shut down. So, and
hopefully I will be on my computer. I noticed, guess when my internet just kicked back in? 3 minutes ago.
Yes. So Jennifer, if you did not register, just go back to the same place you found this one. I do think though, if you registered on Eventbrite, I think it is 2 separate tickets. It's 1 ticket for today, and then you can go in and click on the second ticket for tomorrow, and that'll get you all the information.
And then if anybody is here who registered on Okra, they wouldn't have gotten that registration information. So please email Molly. Can maybe you type the email in the chat there? Either I email myself or Molly for the connection information for tomorrow.
Yeah, there is a separate, so when I send out the info email about tomorrow, it'll tell you how to get into the Zoom, and then it'll also tell you, hey, if you want contact hours, here are the links you need to follow. So it'll all be in one email. So yeah, you do have to register in 2 separate places. One to get the ticket for Eventbrite and to go to the Zoom, and then a second registration if you are interested in getting the contact hours, which are also they're free contact hours. So please, if you have need of that, go for it.
Yeah, and that is on Okra, and I will go in tomorrow. And actually, Molly, I'll need from you a list of who was here. Yeah, and then I'll be able to, and just know that to get those contact hours, if anybody doesn't know, you need an open, which probably everybody needs now anyway to work in schools. But in case you don't know about that, you can email me. I can fill you in with that. But then if you you type in your open to register, and automatically you get that credit. Okay.
Yep.
So I so wish I could see all of you, but maybe tomorrow I will be able to. And thank you for the patience with this crazy technological connections, but I'm glad we had at least this. So bye, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.